Hello everyone, Michael Zadai here. Um, Going to continue my teaching on the Islamic Antichrist. I'm getting a lot of my information from Joel Richardson's book, The Islamic Antichrist. And so I was reading out of his book the last time, and I want to read a little bit more. And we were on a chapter comparing the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi, and the Mahdi is the Islamic version of Jesus. And let's pick it up here. It is clear then that the Bible teaches that the Antichrist will lead a worldwide religious worship movement that will attempt to displace and usurp worship from the God of the Bible. This worship will then be directed toward both himself and to Satan. Now he's speaking of Revelation chapter 19, verse 20, where it says, "And the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf." That's Revelation 19:20. So the worship will then be directed both to himself and Satan, the invisible spirit, the provocateur, the one who is provoking all this, and the puppet master that motivates, empowers, and gives authority to the Antichrist to establish his worldwide task. Likewise, it almost goes without saying that the Mahdi of Islam will be the leader of a worldwide worship movement, a worship movement that will seek to cause anyone who practices any other religion than Islam to renounce his faith and worship Allah, the God of Islam. As we saw in the last chapter, the Mahdi will govern the people by the sunnah of their prophet and establish Islam on earth, and Islam will be victorious over all religions. Thus we see that the Mahdi leads a world revolution that will institute a new world order based on the religion of Islam. Islam will be the only religion allowed. Both the Antichrist and the Mahdi are said to be the unqualified leaders of a global religious movement that will draw worship away from the God of the Bible and his Son, Jesus Christ. As we will see clearly in later chapters, inherent in the worship of Allah within the context of Islam is a direct denial of the God of the Bible and his Son, Jesus Christ. In fact, this is the reason that some Muslims feel so strongly as to say that the Mahdi will eradicate those pigs and dogs, the Christians and Jews, who refuse to convert to Islam, which leads us to the next obvious similarity between the Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Bible is very clear that Satan, through the Antichrist, will specifically target first Jews and then Christians for death. In the book of Revelation, chapters 12 and 13, we read another prophetic passage of Scripture rich with symbolic language. Initially, it is slightly difficult to understand, but after the symbols are explained, it becomes very clear. This is Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. "A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head." The woman, symbolically pictured here, is the family or nation of Israel, the Jewish people. We see that she is crowned with 12 stars. That represents the 12 sons of Israel who became the 12 tribes that make up the family or nation of Israel. It says she was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule over the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. It's Revelation 12, 2 through 5. The woman, is Israel, becomes pregnant and gives birth to a male child who will rule over the nations with an iron scepter. This is a clear reference to Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. The dragon mentioned here is identified in verse 9 as the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. We see that Satan desires to kill Jesus, but instead Jesus is snatched up to God and to his throne. This is a reference to Jesus' ascension to heaven after his resurrection. Um, then it says in Revelation chapter 12, the great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. The dragon pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, that's Israel. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. We see that Satan is enraged at the woman, Israel, and went off to make war against her offspring, those who keep the testimony. Those are Christians who indeed obey God's command. And this is the only passage that makes specific reference to Satan making a direct target of both Jews and Christians. And we know that this passage specifically speaks of the end times because it mentions a 3.5 period. And the Antichrist will have authority to make war against the saints. And the prophet Daniel speaks of this as well. It says in Revelation chapter 13, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise his authority for 42 months, 3.5 years. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. He was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. And in Daniel it says, he will speak against the Most High and oppress the saints, and to try to change the set times and laws. The saints will be handed over to him for 3.5 years. So it's a reference against the Antichrist, both in Revelation and Daniel, that those who resist the Antichrist will be persecuted. Now, though it says the Mahdi's targeted campaign against Jews and Christians. Interesting enough, Islamic tradition speaks much of the Mahdi's special calling to convert Christians and Jews to Islam, yet speaks very little specifically of conversions from other faiths. It seems as though converting Christians and Jews to Islam will be the primary evangelistic thrust of the Mahdi. The following quote was from Ayatollah Ibrahim Amini, clearly articulates this vision. The Mahdi will offer the religion of Islam to the Jews and Christians. If they accept it, they will be spared. Otherwise, they will be killed. And of course, we cannot forget the infamous hadith that has become a favorite of many Muslim anti-Semites. The last hour will not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims will kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree or a rock. Muslim or servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. But the tree would not say, for it is the tree of the Jews. So after commenting on this particular hadith, several Muslim authors quickly point out the very interesting fact that this particular tree is a boxwood tree. It's presently planted in abundance by Jews in Israel. The point is that Muslims accept this final Holocaust to take place within the present state of Israel. This, of course, corresponds to another very similarity between the biblical Antichrist and the Mahdi. The Bible teaches that the Antichrist, with his multi-nation coalition, will attack Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, to conquer it. In Ezekiel it says, I will gather the nations, all nations, to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, the women will be raped, half the city will go into exile. But the rest of the people who submit to Antichrist rule will be taken from the city. That's Zechariah 14:2. And Ezekiel 38, it says, you, Gog, which is Ezekiel's name for Antichrist, will go up. You will be like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and your troops, and many peoples with you. Thus says the Lord God. It will come about on that day that thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil plan, and you will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will against those who are at rest, living securely, all of them living without walls and having no bars or gates, to capture and plunder them, to turn your hand against the waste places which are now inhabited, and against the Israelites who are gathered from the nations, who have acquired cattle and goods, who live in the center of the world. According to the Bible, after this attack, the Antichrist specifically sets up his throne in God's temple. The Apostle Paul says he will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. That's 2 Thessalonians 2:4. The location of the Jewish temple has always been on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Today, the temple that once stood on Mount Moriah does not exist. It was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, as Jesus prophesied. Today, Mount Moriah, sometimes is known as the Temple Mount, is the location of two mosques and the third holiest site of Islam. There's endless speculation about the Temple Mount regarding issues such as exactly where the Jewish temple once stood on the mount, or whether or not a rebuilt Jewish temple will rise there in the future. The above verse from Apostle Paul certainly seemed to indicate that a rebuilt Jewish temple would indeed appear in Jerusalem. For the Apostle Paul says that the Antichrist will set himself up in God's temple. This not so much speaks of a little sitting down as it does as taking a position of authority. Thus we see that the Antichrist will make Mount Moriah, or specifically the rebuilt Jewish temple, the specific location of his rule. Jesus warned of this event 2,000 years ago, referring to the Antichrist having set himself up in the Jewish temple and the events that will immediately follow. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoke of in the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in the Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down to take anything out of his house. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in the winter on Sabbath, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. So here we see Jesus referring to Antichrist's occupation of the temple as the abomination that causes desolation. Desolation refers to chaos, severe persecution against Jews and Christians that will immediately follow when the Antichrist's true identity is revealed. After his military campaign against Jerusalem, the Antichrist will make his base of authority the Temple Mount itself. At this time, it is clear that the Antichrist's malevolent feelings towards Israel will become fully manifest, so much so that Jesus warns that the inhabitants of Jerusalem should flee to the mountains. Now, it's interesting, the Mahdi, which this comes out of Muslim teaching, says that the Mahdi is said to attack Jerusalem and to reconquer it for Islam in order to establish Islamic rule over the earth from Jerusalem. They will be carrying black flags that will come from Iran. No power will be able to stop them, and they will finally reach the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where they will erect their flags. Jerusalem will be the location of the rightly guided caliphate in the center of Islamic rule, which will be headed by, of course, the Islamic Antichrist. So there's going to be a military campaign against Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting to me that even now, President Trump is going over to the Middle East, and he's meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And Joel Richardson actually feels that, and I haven't gotten to this place yet, but he feels like he may be the Antichrist, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So one thing that has to happen, though, his dad is still alive and ruling, but he's old, and his son, the crown prince, is actually now meeting with our president. So I find this very intriguing. I'm pray for President Trump that he's not deceived. Supposedly, they are going to be talking about bringing peace to the Middle East and those sorts of things. But let me tell you, Islam, and President Trump probably doesn't know this, but it's okay to lie in the face of your, especially non-Muslims, kefirs, as we're called, to promote Islam. You can lie in people's faces. So I don't trust him at all, and I pray that President Trump doesn't trust him at all either. But I do know that God's going to use everything that is happening to come down to these last days events where, when you think about it, what Israel's the size of New Jersey, is surrounded by Muslim nations who hate them because they're Jews. They hate them because they're Jewish. And they want to kill them all because they're Jewish. And Christians as well. But they really hate the Jews. So we really are living in the last days. And so I hope that this teaching encourages you to be spiritually prepared, be mentally and emotionally prepared, need to be aware. The church needs to be awake, not asleep. The church needs to be awake. As long as we are here, we are to be light and salt, and we're to be proclaiming the gospel until the Lord takes us out of here. And then there's going to be great darkness all over the whole world. So anyway, thank you for listening, and blessings. And if you ever have any questions or comments, you can always send me a message in Messenger. Okay, blessings.